Welcome to 3 Words Podcasts. My name is Dr. Tyler Schwanz. I'm not Dr. Michael Brown, but I'm a member of the team, and I'm very excited to host today's episode, which is titled Fall Asleep Faster. It's a bite-sized podcast. It's only just 13, 14 minutes long. Give it a listen, and I think you'll walk away just a little bit better and maybe get a little bit better sleep tonight than you thought you were going to get because of listening to this podcast. Thanks. So Justin, you selected these 3 words. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what they are and what they mean to you?
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Tyler. Today's 3 words are fall asleep faster, and I'm so excited to share the pod with you today.
Fantastic.
So for me, I think that when it comes to these words, I know for myself personally that I'm not the best version of myself when I am getting insufficient sleep. Mm-hmm. And I think at the same time, professionally, as a family physician, I want for my patients and as a podcaster, I want for our audience to be able to live fuller and healthier lives.
Right.
So that's why I'm really eager to talk about this topic with you today.
You know, I think the topic of sleep became very at the forefront of my mind when I was sleep deprived. And many of us that have gone through whether, we all have our stories, but going through med school or chiropractic school, like there's a natural time in your life when you're probably going to be sleep deprived. Mm-hmm. And now, being a parent of a couple of kids, I've gone through those sections of life as well. And I remember when my second son was not sleeping more than 2 hours at a time for about 6 months. And I remember feeling like I was literally dying, my body was dying. And so I started diving into some research and learning some more. And I found that my body was actually dying. It was shutting down. And that sleep is, I tell my patients, when it comes to all the different elements that they can focus on, whether it's their diet or their exercise or their chiropractic care, any of that, the thing that I put ahead of all of those things is sleep. And it's because it is just so pivotal. And I feel like falling asleep faster is probably going to be advice that rings true for a lot of people. And they're going to click on this episode and be like, yes, I need to know how to fall asleep faster because I only have this many hours. Are you going to teach me how to fall asleep faster? So do you have, as a part of when you've been thinking about this topic, do you have any thoughts on, I guess, sleep in general or actually falling asleep faster? Do you have some tips for people as far as that goes?
Well, I'd love to talk about, I guess, sleep in general. So it's like you were saying, how your body was actually dying when you were not getting enough sleep, that every single animal sleeps. It is a thing that is completely essential. And we actually spend a third of our lives asleep. So if we live 90 years, literally 30 years of our lives, we're going to be sleeping. So when on this podcast and with DMB coaching, when we're talking about being fully alive and maximizing every moment, that a third of our moments are engaged in this act of sleeping. So how do we maximize that from the perspective of having an adequate quantity of sleep, but also an adequate quality of sleep? And if we're not having either of those two things or both of those things at the same time, then our cells are not regenerating. Our memory is not as good. We are not at our best. There's a lot of really powerful research about the negative health effects too of inadequate sleep, including increased risk of ending life by suicide, increased risk of depression, of substance use, of having obesity, of having high blood pressure, of having diabetes. There's some association with cancers. There's so many different things where our bodies, they really need sleep, and it's completely essential.
I saw a meme the other day and it showed somebody pretending to be in a coma, and it was a headline that said woman wakes up after 13-year coma, and the first comment was I'm so jealous. Yes. Oh, that coma sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And I've been there, I've been there. Talk to me a little bit. So, 8 hours of sleep, where does that come from? Do we really need 8 hours? What does that look like?
Sure. So the amount of sleep that we actually need kind of changes throughout the course of our lifetime. We need the most sleep as infants and newborns, and then it kind of slowly goes down throughout the course of our lives, and it kind of stabilizes out in adolescence to young adulthood and continues along even in older adults, that the recommended amount of sleep is really this kind of 7 to 9 hours per night. And there's a little bit of individual variation there, such that there are some people who say, I only need 6 hours of sleep per night and I can totally function and do the things that I need to do, and I'm not falling asleep and I'm at my best. And there is some of that. But when you get to this when people say, I only need 4 hours a night of sleep, that that is not actually true.
Nope.
There's not that degree of individual variation, and that you start to have some of those negative effects on your health. Even if you feel like you're doing well, you very well may not be.
So even your dad, even Dr. Michael Brown needs 8 hours of sleep.
He needs 7 to 9 or maybe 6 if he's one of the good ones.
Fantastic. Talk to me about caffeine. I feel like you can't talk about sleep without talking about caffeine.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that I've seen some research for, my buddy was going to open a coffee shop, and he gave me this ridiculous number of like the amount of money that millennials spend on coffee, like buying it from a coffee shop every year. He's like, it's a gold mine. Like, people love this stuff. And but even it's a drug. It wakes you up. It keeps you awake. Like, how does it work? How does it affect people's sleep?
Yeah. So the half-life of caffeine is actually 5 to 9 hours. So it stays in your body a lot longer than maybe you would think. So officially the recommendation is to be able to fall asleep faster, you should probably have no caffeine after lunchtime, to make sure that it's officially out of your system.
You are no fun, Dr. Brown.
I can appreciate and understand that 2 p.m., 3 p.m. I'm trying to get through those last couple of hours of work. But I can say that the evidence says that if you drink caffeine after lunch, that could add a couple of extra minutes to the onset of your sleep from when you start to try to fall asleep.
Let's pause this conversation for just a second. I want to encourage you, anybody who's listening to this, if you have a friend or a family member who has expressed to you their difficulty falling asleep, or maybe they're always waking up tired, never feeling fully rested, I think that this would be the perfect episode for you to send to them. How about alcohol? Like, a lot of people have a nightcap at night because they feel like it helps them fall asleep. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It definitely can help to fall asleep, but it doesn't help to stay asleep, interestingly.
I read a book called Why We Sleep a few years back and highly recommend it. And so when it comes to alcohol and like sleep inducing drugs, maybe like an Ambien or something like that, the difference from my understanding is that it sedates you. It doesn't necessarily put you into a state of sleep that would, like, if you were to look at the brain waves of, people have heard of REM sleep, like rapid eye movement, and NREM sleep. And I've heard that when you drink alcohol or take like a sleep aid, it makes your brainwaves most closely to resemble like a coma, as opposed to that of healing NREM or REM sleep. And so when I coach my patients, I let them know, like, hey, I know that whiskey and Coke might feel like it puts you right to sleep, or they're taking these sleep aids on a very regular basis, but it is starving their brain and starving their body of that necessary reset time. And so I think that that's an important thing that people need to realize. Just because they feel sleepy doesn't mean that they're actually being put to sleep with that stuff.
Totally. And our bodies were made for sleep. So a lot of this is about, how do I regulate my circadian rhythm so that my body is tired at the right times, and that I use that tiredness to my advantage? And then how do I be awake when I need to be awake? So a lot of when I'm talking to patients about, first line for issues with falling asleep, staying asleep, is some of these sleep hygiene things. So in the same way that, you brush your teeth, you wash your hair, there's some hygiene things for overall health and well-being. There's some hygiene things for when it comes to sleep. So I talk to patients about, trying to go to sleep and wake up at about the same time every day, even on vacation, even on the weekends, and not taking these long naps in the middle of the day, having a chaotic, now I'm going to play video games until 2 a.m. or I'm going to stay up really late and work on this assignment. And when our sleep schedules get kind of messy and flipped, then that can be one of the main reasons that we have a hard time falling asleep when we think we're supposed to be sleeping.
And I've heard of this concept called sleep debt, where you actually, if you get one night where you get 6 hours, and then you have the next night where you get 6 hours instead of 8, like, you're in sleep debt 4 hours. And you essentially have to make that up. And it's very difficult to do that all at once. If you have a period of time where you're not sleeping, like I mentioned with my son, for 6 months, not getting appropriate sleep, like, I'm probably still digging out of that sleep debt. You know what I mean? So,
totally.
And as you've mentioned, like, our bodies are designed for sleep, and the disease processes that start to show themselves. I know that when we were going through that period of time, my wife started to develop thyroid issues and actually became diagnosed, or at least showed a lot of signs of like this autoimmune thyroid condition that like seemed to come out of nowhere, but it was resultant of this lack of sleep or the increased stress that was associated with that. And so I know that it's got to be so important. So
I know that we talk a lot on 3 Words podcast about this idea that we spend so much of this kind of early part of our life prioritizing our finances and our profession. And then at the end of our life, we say, okay, now I finally want to start investing in the physical dimension of my life so that I can stay alive a little bit longer.
Right.
But like you said, there's a sleep debt that if you're cranking it out at work and you're stressed and you're not getting enough sleep and you're killing yourself in that way for all these years, you will have fewer years at the end of your life to be able to finally say, oh, well, I'll finally sleep when I'm retired. Or as people say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, which I guess is definitely true. So
right on. When you talk about quality of sleep, what, I guess, could you expand upon that? What's the best kind of quality sleep that someone can get? Not just hours met, but what does quality sleep look like?
Yeah. So first of all, it's that when you wake up, you feel well rested and that you're able to act and think and have memory and do the things that you need to be able to do. A lot of quality of sleep is judged by the outcome of how you live your waking hours, I think. But then for many people, if they're getting adequate sleep and they're like, I am sleeping 8 or 9 hours or 10 hours and I'm still exhausted, then that tells us there's probably something wrong with the quality of your sleep. There's something wrong with the way that your brain waves are working while you're sleeping that maybe should be assessed further. There could be an underlying condition such as, for example, sleep apnea, where people actually stop breathing when they sleep, which can have really, really significant negative impacts on health.
Yeah. I had my own journey with sleep apnea, actually. So I grew up where if I went on a vacation and I had to sleep in the same hotel room as my dad, I just wanted somebody to just take the pillow and smother me. I was just, I was maddening because he was just like all night long. My brothers and I were the same. We're like, this is the worst. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, Dad probably had sleep apnea. And it took my observation of my son, the same son that didn't sleep, and his own snoring, even as an infant and as a toddler. I was like, my dad snores, I snore, my kid snores. I wonder if I should get checked for sleep apnea. So I did. Yeah. I did, and it's real easy now. Like I went into a hospital and I slept there overnight. They put a EEG nodes all over my head and they tested my heart and they observed me. But you can do it at home now. They can give you at-home testing kits and everything. And but basically they found out that I was stopping breathing 26 times per hour. Yeah. Wow. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I said, well, like, are those like micro moments? And they said those 26 times were at least 5 seconds or more. I was like, oh my gosh. And so that's enough time to dig me out of the REM sleep. If I got into REM sleep, dig me out of it and bring me back into that superficial sleep wake kind of area. Sure. So for decades of my life, I was just not waking up rested. And I tell you what, since I have a CPAP and there are different things that you can do. There's mouth taping. There's things we can talk about. But I chose to go the CPAP route and oh my goodness, like at that point in my life, I truly felt like I only needed 4 hours of sleep. Like I could go to bed and wake up 4 hours later and feel way better than I did at 8. And I've since adjusted and now I get the proper amount of sleep and the proper quality of sleep. But it's just like been life-changing for me as far as energy wise, as far as weight loss. Like a lot of people that struggle with weight loss turns out like they're constantly in this fight or flight scenario and you can't be like in rest and digest and fight or flight at the same time. And maybe it's just because they're not sleeping properly. It actually has a big impact on their muscle mass and their weight loss and their bone density and all this stuff that we've already talked about. But so I have a very, I guess, personal relationship with you. Since you mentioned the sleep apnea, that's been my journey and it's been awesome. I would highly recommend anybody that's out there. And if your partner is like kicking you and being like, you snore like crazy, I feel like you're going to die because you stopped breathing. Yeah. Like, that's what that might be. So get that checked out. Get checked out. It's going to be amazing. You're going to love it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you talked about that because I think that one of the things that I wanted to make sure we talked about today is that there are always going to be things that we can't control about the quality of our sleep. The evidence shows that for people who are historically oppressed in our society, for people who are Black, for people who are Hispanic, for Native Americans, Indigenous people, women, people who are divorced, people who have young children, of course, people who work rotating shifts or have low socioeconomic status. These are some of the risk factors for having inadequate opportunity for sleep, as well as higher risk of just insomnia from the stress and anxiety as you're going to bed at night. And, there are things that we can't control, but there are choices that we can make, each of us, that can improve the quality of our sleep and can also help us to fall asleep more quickly if that's something that we're struggling with.
For sure. It's so important. And I've even read that in certain countries, if you work a shift that goes overnight, if you work third shift, you're paid hazard pay because it's recognized so much so that loss of sleep is hazardous to your health.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that should be brought more to the forefront of everybody's minds, and sleep hygiene be made a practice in every single home as much as possible, as much as their jobs and their situation allows. So are you any closing thoughts on this topic that you want to make sure that our listeners walk away from?
Yeah, I think if I could give a few kind of final and additional tips to our listeners and our viewers today in regards to this idea of falling asleep faster, I say, normalize your sleep schedule, first of all, like we talked about before. I'd say sleep when you're tired, and when you're not tired, get out of bed, go do a quiet, restful activity in a dimly lit area. If you're reading a boring book when you're struggling to fall asleep before bed, you go in a quiet room, read something boring, you'll be out in a couple of minutes. I think that can make a big difference as well for people. I say try to avoid screens at bedtime, try to avoid heavy lighting at bedtime. I have a lot of patients that will tell me that, I have such a hard time falling asleep. And they'll say, I need to have the TV on so that I can fall asleep. And it's interesting that they're coming to me for having a hard time falling asleep and yet they're so tied to keeping the TV on when they're sleeping. There are choices that each of us as individuals can make to help us to live healthier, fuller lives, first of all, by falling asleep faster.
Thank you for the conversation, Justin. I really appreciate your insights. And fall asleep faster. You heard him.
Thanks, Dr. Tyler.
Thanks again for watching the episode, listening to it in the car, whatever you're doing. We hope that it made your life a little bit better. If you do want to go deeper with us, we do have a newsletter. In fact, I write the newsletter, so I think it's pretty great. If you want to subscribe to it, just go to dmbcoaching.com/subscribe and you'll be added to the list. So do that, stay connected with us, and we look forward to growing with you. Thanks again for listening to the episode, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.